We will be talking about the effects of exercise on body temperature. In order to explain this topic, our research will be broken down into what causes body temperature to increase during exercise, how the body maintains temperature during exercise, and the effects of environmental temperature on bodily functions. Firstly, I will be talking about body temperature increase during exercise. In the human body, energy requires oxygen to burn starch as a process of producing carbon dioxide and water. A major byproduct of this process is the liberation of heat. Half the energy stores of the metabolic processes of the body are immediately released as heat. The rest of this heat is stored in a high-energy molecule known as adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. ATP is a macromolecule that serves as the primary energy currency of the human cell. It contains the nucleoside adenosine and a tail consisting of 3 phosphate oxygen molecules, hence triphosphate. ATP is involved in the transportation of chemical energy within cells for metabolism. The molecule is also used by enzymes and proteins in various cellular processes. For ATP to produce energy, a reaction occurs removing one of the phosphate oxygen groups. The outcome is the production of energy and heat, as well as the conversion from adenosine triphosphate into adenosine diphosphate, or ADP, a process called hydrolysis. To resynthesize the lost phosphate, a chemical compound called creatine phosphate is broken down in combination with ADP to produce ATP. This process repeats until all energy stores are depleted. A particularly large amount of ATP is stored in muscle cells, as high levels of energy is required to produce a muscle contraction. During exercise, more than 70% of the energy that powers muscles is lost as heat, causing body temperature to rise. There are 2 sources in a muscle contraction that cause the production of heat. The first is an exothermic chemical reaction that breaks down ATP into ADP, causing the release of chemical energy. The energy is then converted into mechanical energy to perform the movement of the muscle. The initial release of the chemical energy causes neighboring molecules to collide with each other, causing friction and the production of heat. The second source of heat is within the muscle contraction, which also involves friction but at a much smaller level. When the muscle fibers contract, they rub past each other, exciting the atoms of the fibers, producing small amounts of heat. In summary, ATP is the primary energy currency of the human cell. The breakdown of the molecule causes a release of energy and heat. Hydrolysis is the production of energy as well as the conversion process from ATP into ADP. Resynthesis involves creatine phosphate, which is broken down in combination with ADP to produce ATP. And muscle contractions produce heat through chemical reactions and friction between muscle fibers, causing an increase in body temperature.
In the second part, we will be talking about the maintenance of body temperature during exercise. To do so, we will investigate it in 3 matters. The first of which, we'll be talking about how much heat we have to deal with in terms of maintaining the body temperature. Secondly, we'll be talking about how the hypothalamus is the body's thermostat. And thirdly, the body's response. During strenuous exercise, the body's heat production may exceed 1000 watts, an increase of 10 to 20-fold. Heat starts to accumulate in the body when the heat dissipating mechanisms are unable to cope with metabolic heat production. The duration and intensity of exercise, which drives metabolic heat production, contribute significantly to the amount of heat accumulated in the body during exercise. 70% of metabolic heat generated has to be transported from the peripheral compartments of the body to the skin to be dissipated to the environment. 30% of the heat generated is converted to mechanical energy. Some of the heat produced is stored, raising body core temperature by a few degrees. Rises in body temperature are sensed by central and skin thermoreceptors, and this sensory information is processed by the hypothalamus to trigger appropriate effector responses. Other sensory inputs from baroreceptors and osmoreceptors can modify these responses. In humans, body temperature is regulated at the hypothalamus, as explained before. This is a region of the brain. It regulates the body temperature to function within 1 plus or minus 1 degree Celsius of resting temperature over each 24-hour cycle. Deviation from resting body temperature affects various physiological systems in the body, which is indicative of the span of biological functions and dysfunctions that interact with the thermoregulatory mechanisms. Evaporation of sweat and increased skin blood flow are effective mechanisms for the dissipation of heat from the body, but dehydration impairs the capacity to sweat and lose body heat. Evaporative heat loss takes place when sweat changes from liquid to gaseous states. During physical exercise, more than 80% of heat is dissipated through evaporative heat loss, making it the primary means of heat removal from the body. About 1 liter of sweat is lost for each hour of exercise in hot conditions. Hot, humid environments or inappropriate clothing may compromise the ability to lose heat from the body. Hyperthermia may also function as the signal that triggers the central fatigue response during intense exercise. The occurrence of central fatigue at a threshold temperature may serve to protect the body from overheating by forcing exercise cessation so as to prevent further increase in body temperature. Hypothermia may therefore serve as a self-limiting signal to the central nervous system to protect the body against lethal heat stress. Once the metabolic heat is transferred to the skin, there are various ways in which it can be lost to the surrounding environment, including radiation and conduction. Radiation is a loss or gain of heat in the form of infrared heat rays. All objects that are not at absolute zero temperature emit such rays. The human body simultaneously emits and receives radiant heat. When the body temperature is higher than that of its surrounding, a greater quantity of heat radiates from the body than to it. The transfer of heat from a body to an object, or vice versa, or within an organism down a thermal gradient is called conduction. In this case, an athlete exercising may be making contact with an object of different temperature. For example, a runner could be running on a cold road, thus leading to conduction and eventual cooling down. To summarize this part, we know that exercise is associated with an increase in body core temperature. We therefore need to lower this body core temperature to avoid the risk of organ failure. The lowering of body core temperature can be done through various mechanisms. The first one we talked about was perspiration. The second we talked about was the central fatigue response, and the third, conduction and radiation.
Now I'll be talking of the effects of environmental temperature on body functions. Many athletes struggle with doing physical activity in hot weather. Dehydration is very common when people do physical exercise in heat. The negative effects of dehydration are there is a higher perceived exertion, a possible increased reliance on carbohydrates, and this can lead to overheating. Dehydration is made a lot worse in hot, humid, or a windless environment because the mechanisms that cool your body down aren't as efficient or will be stopped to keep fluids in your body. For example, you stop sweating when you get too hot. Overheating is detrimental to bodily functions and can lead to hyperthermia. Some symptoms can be dizziness, muscle cramps, high body temperature, confusion, and unconsciousness. Cold temperatures puts extra pressure on your metabolism, and this leads to extra strain on your heart. In cold temperatures, the muscles react slower and have to work harder in order to maintain intensity, in turn causing more lactic acid to be produced. As the body loses more heat, it has to work harder to maintain a stable temperature. This leads to the production of glucose, which is the quickest and easiest metabolized fuel to be used for heat generation over muscle contraction. By consequence, the metabolic load is increased on the body, which leads to less efficiency and less oxygen. The body then has to take the heat from extremities to the core for protection. When exercising in the cold, we don't feel as thirsty or hot, so generally we hydrate less. However, we are still sweating, and in a cold environment we lose a lot of fluids through our breathing. This can lead to great losses of heat and dehydration. However, the body adapts to an environment. Therefore, if you train in hot or cold weather, the less the environment will actually affect your bodily functions.
To conclude, the effects of exercise on body temperature have therefore been explored into detail with the study of the following three parts. Firstly, the body temperature increase during exercise. Secondly, maintaining body temperature during exercise. And finally, we explore the effects of temperature increase on the body.